What's up guys, welcome to this spoiler-filled review of Spider-Man No Way Home. Better late than never. This is a big film. I felt the need I had to discuss it at some point in a larger scale and form. So here we are, full spoilers for this review. So if you haven't seen Spider-Man No Way Home, you should probably go and see it. Otherwise, well, stick around I suppose if you don't care. But this is going to have spoilers all about who's in there, who dies, who makes a return, who doesn't show up, and so on and so forth. So go watch Spider-Man No Way Home and then come back and watch this if you want. In a nutshell though, what's this film about? Well, Peter Parker. Everyone now knows he is Spider-Man, and that's a bit of an issue for him because it's not only affecting him, it's affecting his friends and his family and everyone he knows. There are some legal ramifications because of that, because he's a kid at the end of the day. So he goes to Doctor Strange and wonders, what if nobody knew I was Spider-Man? So they perform a spell and, well, it doesn't exactly go quite the way they wanted it to. Instead, what happens is it opens up a doorway into the multiverse, bringing in other characters and people who know Peter Parker as Spider-Man. That's the crux of the narrative in a nutshell, and that's all revealed in the trailer. If you've seen the trailers, you know what this film's about. What did I think of Spider-Man No Way Home? Well, first, I've only seen it once. I think this is a film that will benefit greatly from multiple viewings. There's a lot going on here, a lot of plot points. It's got to wrap up the events of Spider-Man Far From Home. It's got to introduce the whole multiverse elements of it. It's got to deal with Peter Parker and Spider-Man as we know him. And then it's got to wrap all that up and bring it all into a nice, neat bow tie Christmas present. So there's a lot going on. It can be a little overwhelming. The pacing is pretty quick for the first half of the film because it is trying to wrap up so many things and then introduce so many other things. It does get its groove, I think, in the second half of the film when it does feel a bit more like a traditional MCU Marvel superhero film in terms of the pacing and the speed of things. I think this film's good. I'm not sure if it's great. I think on repeat viewings I might reconsider that, and I think on a repeat viewing I will get all the references, I will see all the little tidbits going on. I do think I've got a good grasp of everything that went on. I don't think I've overlooked anything. But I do feel like I need to say it again to really settle in and to let the hype at certain moments not take away from what's actually happening. So for example, there's one moment where Daredevil shows up and my mind was blown in that. I kind of suspected he was going to be in this film. That was the rumours heading into it. So when he showed up, in my screen and at least everyone was hooting and hollering and cheering, and it was a really awesome moment. Only we couldn't actually hear what was happening because everyone was taking too much commotion about it. So there are things like that where I do feel like on a repeat viewing, when everyone's calmed down and where the shock and awe of all the things is settled, where I can actually sit down and watch it and take it in for what it is and just focus on the story and the characters a bit more. So, good film, not great, maybe great on repeat viewings, time will tell. I think where this film really benefits from is the exploration of the multiverse. So the multiverse is something that's being explored in numerous Marvel things now, at least in Marvel Studios terms. The first one being WandaVision, where it's teasing things out there. Then Loki, where it just flat out opens up the possibilities of the multiverse. Seemingly before Loki, there wasn't a multiverse. At least that's my understanding of it. So this is the first one where it's like, right, bringing in proper elements from the multiverse. On the Sony side of things, of course, we've got Spider-Man Into the Multiverse, or the Spider-Verse rather, and this is essentially a live-action version of that in certain regards, bringing in different versions of Peter Parker, bringing in some of the alternate enemies and characters from other Spider-Man movies, and I think it's a cool thing. Cool to see some of these characters again on screen for the first time in many years in certain situations, but also cool in that a lot of multiverse things kind of has the main character go to a different universe or explore a different universe and get lost and confused. This one does things a bit differently in that it brings characters from a different universe into ours. So I think that's a little bit of a twist on it, and I kind of like that. I will say, if you're a Spider-Man fan, a Spider-Man movie fan in particular, it doesn't matter which Spider-Man's your favourite, whether it's the Tobey Maguire movies or the Andrew Garfield ones or the Tom Holland ones. I think there's an argument to be made that this is the best Spider-Man movie. I think where this film really shines and why this film's really something special is that this is essentially Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man 4. and Andrew Garfield's The Amazing Spider-Man 3, while also being Tom Holland's Spider-Man 3. It's all of their films while still being in the MCU, and it makes all those other films relevant and important to an extent. If you've never seen those Spider-Man movies, well, sitting down and watching this, a lot of the references and a lot of the big moments might be a little lost on you. They might be somewhat interesting, enough to make you go, oh, I need to go and watch those films now. Those films are somewhat important to understand these characters and these situations and these moments, and I think that's pretty cool. But in relation to that, I will say a lot of the moments and situations and spots were very predictable. So we all kind of knew what to expect from this film, and that's exactly what this film gave us. I don't think in terms of how it introduced the other Spider-Man and how it dealt with the other Spider-Man, I don't think there were any real surprises there. So that was a bit disappointing. But also it's like, hey, they gave me what I wanted, so I can't be too disappointed by that. A big example being Andrew Garfield diving off the top of a tower, grabbing Zendaya and saving her life, and then having that moment where it's like, oh, are you alright? And he's just crying his eyes out because he actually managed to save the girl. That, for example, I knew that was going to happen in this film. It was obvious, it had to happen in this film. That's the closure Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man needed. And it was a great moment, actually one of the highlights of this film. But again, I knew it was going to happen. And then there's all the stuff about everyone finding out that Tobey Maguire produces his own spider fluid in his body, and all the weird things going on around that. Again, we knew that was going to have to be a thing, it had to be. And the jokes were pretty on the nose about it. But hey, I'm glad it's there. So the best way to describe this film though is that it's the culmination of all the Spider-Man movies. It is the Avengers Endgame of Spider-Man. And with that being said, it's also one of the darker Spider-Man movies. Like Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man went for a much more like darker, gritty, grounded tone. This one is going more for that in a more emotional sense. This is probably the most emotional Spider-Man movie. There's key moments which can make you cry, key moments that can make you happy and sad and all sorts of emotions here. It's a very emotional film, mixed in with lots of action and comedy and so much more. There's a lot going on. And I would say if you take away the multiverse side of things, the story is actually pretty straightforward and generic. While there is a lot going on, it is a very typical superhero story where, hey, the superhero's got this normal life, he tries to then address this life, and then problems occur from that, so he's got to deal with those problems, and then guess what, he saves the day. It's a very straightforward, generic, traditional story format and formula, and it does, the first half does get a little crammed in there a bit, but it's still a pretty good traditional superhero story at the end of the day. And while I think this is a very emotional film, both in the high department of being happy and laughing and funny, and in terms of the low department being sad and crying and depressing, I do think that a lot of the moments don't always hit the mark that they wanted to, don't always hit as hard as I wanted them to. So a lot of the comedic moments, for example, aren't laugh out loud hilarious. A lot of the comedic moments just kind of fall flat. So there's the moment, for example, where Spider-Man's friend Ned finds out that all of Spider-Man's friends kind of die. They have a history of dying, and it's like, oh yeah, that's a thing. It's not really funny. And then they continue that with Ned awkwardly approaching Peter Parker as if like, oh, I'm being careful around you now. And no one in my theatre seemed to notice that. No one seemed to laugh at it or find that funny or anything like that. Yet it was clearly meant to be a comedic moment. So there are moments like that which don't hit the mark. And then there are emotional moments like Aunt May's death, which, while being very sad and depressing and emotional, I don't think left too many people crying their eyes out. And speaking of Aunt May's death, I think this is a really good scene. While I don't think it left me crying my eyes out, I do think it played with emotions well, I do think it played with expectations well. The fact that she is knocked down and then she kind of springs back up and is like, yeah, trying to brush it off, I'm okay. And then all of a sudden it's like she collapses like, yeah. It's very traditional, very predictable stuff, but it does play around with that. It makes you go like, oh, will she, won't she, for a moment? And then you get that moment. And I love the fact that she gets the, with great power comes great responsibility moment. I think it's the first time that Aunt May herself has actually been given that moment, and I think it's really cool and it works really well in context to this. And I think that means that this Spider-Man trilogy for Marvel's MCU is just Spider-Man's origin trilogy. He is now Spider-Man, and whatever's next for him, I think is going to be much more in line with like the Tobey Maguire set Spider-Man, the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man, where he is older and he is more mature and, well, maybe not more mature, but more experienced Spider-Man. I think that's what we're getting moving forward. And when I'm talking about all the characters and all the moments, they don't all get the moment to shine. Well, no, that's not true. They get their moments to shine, but they all don't get the same amount of attention. So Doc Ock and Green Goblin, for example, get a lot of attention. They get a lot of spotlight in terms of the villains. They get a big overarching narrative surrounding them. Whereas Lizard, for example, gets a few lines here and there, and for the most part, he's kind of just there. Same with Sandman and somewhat Electro. So there's a lot of characters in here, so they all don't get their big moments, their big opportunities. They don't all get the same amount of time dedicated to them because they simply can't. And that's to be expected, and the ones that do get the moments to shine really do stand out. But like I said, they all get their moments here and there. Electro does get his big action moments, he does get his jokey moments. Lizard, for example, also gets his moments. Maybe not so much in the action department for Lizard, but they're there. They do have their moments, they do have their spotlights. And I think a lot of hesitancy was going into this film was that we've had Spider-Man movies before where there's been a lot of villains in there. Spider-Man 3, Amazing Spider-Man 2, they both had a lot of villains in there, and that's arguably the worst thing about those films, the fact that there's too much going on. So this one, to have all of them in there was a lot like, ooh, are they making the same mistake here? And no, this actually does a much better job of it than those films, because this film doesn't have to spend so much time establishing those characters and bringing them in with origin stories, because these are just those characters transported to here. So it's just like, oh, here's Lizard. Right, Tom Holland, meet Lizard. Right, done. Let's move on. Here's the story. So I do think it fares a lot better that way on. Action scenes are really good in this film. I think this is the best choreographed Spider-Man movie ever made in terms of the action scenes. The fact that you've got Spider-Man doing all these flips and moves, and there's even moves taken out of the recent Spider-Man video games brought into here. Then there's a fight scene between Green Goblin and Spider-Man in this apartment building where Green Goblin's just like wrestling Spider-Man, doing power bombs and spine busters, and it's really cool and awesome. And yeah, they really give each character their own like style and their own moves and techniques, and that's really well done. Ultimately, in terms of the story and in terms of how good this film could have been, I think that a lot of the hype and a lot of the rumors and spoilers heading into this film have damaged this film. I think because we all kind of knew that Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield were coming in, we all knew that was going to happen, we all expected that to happen, so that when it did happen, it's like, wait, okay, it's happened. It's like, it could have been a much bigger moment. And yes, they kept it a secret in the trailers, although pretty badly with that editing. And we knew that the other villains were going to be in there because they're in the trailers. I think there was just too much that we knew heading into it, and that has ruined some of these moments a little bit. So let's talk a bit more about the characters. Tom Holland absolutely nails Spider-Man. He is my favorite Spider-Man, I've got to be honest. And he has been for a while. If you've seen my Spider-Man rant video, you'll kind of know that. And I think he's perfected it at this point. This is a true sequel to his prior movies where he is getting older, he is mature, and he is trying to get on with his life while also still being Spider-Man. I think he does a really good job of balancing the superhero stuff with the personal stuff and trying to balance them and mix them together, and it works really well. He's a really good actor. There's a lot of emotion in here. He has a huge range of emotion, from being like angry and furious to being sad and crying his eyes out to then being jokey and fun. There's a lot of range to his performance here, and yeah, I think this is something special. I think he's absolutely nailed being Peter Parker in a way that the other Spider-Man never have, in my opinion. And this is all about his Spider-Man growing up, maturing, going from being a teen to an adult, and that's reflected in both his performance and the character and what he's going through, while also the story being that about that as well. Marissa Tomei's Aunt May, I think this is her best performance as Aunt May. I think this is Aunt May's biggest role by far in any of the movies so far. In the prior ones, she was kind of just more like comedic relief or some sort of like advice-giving figure. Here, it's much bigger than that. She actually plays a much more pivotal, important role to the story. The fact that she does die at like the halfway point, maybe not even that, 2/3 of the way through something. She's a very key person in Peter Parker's life. It's going to be interesting to see how the MCU deals with that moving forward. It's been done in video games, although we haven't actually seen the follow-up to that in the video games yet. And yeah, that's going to be interesting to see what they do with that. I am going to miss Marissa Tomei's character because I do think she's the best Aunt May. I think she's like the cool aunt that you all want to have, and I think she's much more age appropriate compared to a lot of the other Aunt Mays. And I think the whole thing, like I've already mentioned about her death, about how she is given the with great power comes great responsibility thing. I think that because she's given that, because we know her much more than we ever knew any of the Uncle Bens that have done it, because we've had 3 films of her, essentially 4 if you include Civil War, and was she in one of the Avenger movies as well? I can't remember. But we've spent a lot of time with her, so her coming up with that moment and her death being that moment, I feel like it's much more important than any other moment where we have had that with great power comes great responsibility moment. That's a lingering thing that's part of every Spider-Man's motivations and goals moving forward. Usually it's what gets him started. Here though, it's like, right, this is what his mantra is going to be moving forward as Spider-Man, and I think it's a really pivotal, cool moment, and I'm glad that she's given that. I've already talked about it, but Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield do return. I think their performances are really good. I've always liked Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man, and I've always disliked Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man. Tobey Maguire coming in, he's doing his usual thing. If you like Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, that's what you're getting here. He is goofy, he's awkward, he is cheesy. He's got some weird like facial expressions and emotions, and it's like, right, he's not human, but that's what his Spider-Man was, and you get that from him. Andrew Garfield coming in, much cooler, much more laid back, and much more of like, dare I say, hippie-ish, maybe? I don't know. I'm not in with the kids these days, is that the term that we used to describe him? But anyway, they're both really cool, they've got their moments, and I don't think they ever distract from anything that's going on. It's not like they're coming in and stealing the scene or stealing this film from Tom Holland at all. So I think that's really worked well. I think they've just given the right amount of attention, and that's really good. Doctor Strange, he's in this film, haven't mentioned him yet. He's almost like the antagonist of this film, but in a good way, in that he's trying to solve this problem, he's trying to save the day, just from a different approach to Spider-Man. Spider-Man wants to help these villains and then send them back home, whereas Doctor Strange is trying to basically take the quicker, easier, safer way out and just send them home immediately, which would mean that they would die. And I do think they do a good job explaining these 2 points of view, the fact that neither of them's kind of wrong. Yeah, Doctor Strange's is a bit more radical and a bit more aggressive and a bit more villainous, but hey, it's still a solution to this problem. He still means well by it. He doesn't want to necessarily kill him, he's just trying to do good. So I do think it does a good job of making him still being a hero, just from a different point of view. And I really like his performance in this film. Again, he doesn't distract from Tom Holland. Tom Holland is very much the main character here. He's only coming in here every now and then, but when he has to. And he's not the one doing all the fighting, he's not the one saving the day. This is a Spider-Man movie. MJ and Ned. These are key characters in Peter Parker's life. I do think it's a little disappointing that for a lot of the film they are kind of just there, and they actually make reference to the fact that they're kind of just there. So a lot of the times they are there saying, hey, we've got your back, we're here. Now what do we do? And then they're just kind of left there in the room, and then all of a sudden they get involved in it and they have to run away and Spider-Man's got to save them. It does feel like they are there because the contracts say they have to be there, rather than because they are necessary to the film or whatever. They're there to raise the stakes for Spider-Man, for Peter Parker, no other reason. And they do get their moments, particularly Zendaya. Zendaya and the relationship with Peter Parker, I think, is really good, really well established and really well built upon. And yeah, so that side works. Ned, however, I feel like is not given a huge amount to do in this film. He is the comedic relief, and it doesn't always work. J. Jonah Jameson's back. We knew he was in the last film as well, and he's much more grounded, much more believable and realistic depiction of J. Jonah Jameson, which is fine, but there's not a lot of comedic relief here, and that's a bit disappointing. I expected him to be a bit funnier than what he is, and he doesn't have a huge role in the film either. Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin, I think, will now go down as one of the best Spider-Man villains on screen ever. The fact that he's coming back from Spider-Man 1 and playing the same character. I think he's doing a much better job at balancing out Green Goblin and Norman Osborn. They are different people with different personalities. The fact that he can basically flip a switch and go from one to the other and a different change of emotions and expressions, really good. A really good performance from him. And he's a villain that you love to hate, even though there is a redemptive side to him. And Venom. Yeah, Tom Hardy's Venom is here, and let's not talk about that. It's a stinger at the end credits. He's here, it's played for a laugh, glad he's gone. Yeah, don't talk about him. In terms of production, the soundtrack and score is great. I could have done them with a little bit more of the key iconic Spider-Man theme song, but I'm fine with what we have got. And I do think it's pretty fast paced. They could have slowed it down a little bit. One final thing I'm going to say now though is that I don't want more of this multiverse. I don't need to see Tobey Maguire or Andrew Garfield again. If you really want, bring in Andrew Garfield for one more film. But yeah, I've seen closure on their part. I don't need more. And that's my spoiler-filled review of Spider-Man: No Way Home. I like the film. I do think it could be better. I want to see it again. If you've liked this video, why not subscribe to my channel and follow me on Twitter and Instagram at @TheUnscoredGrantBurton for more videos like this and all my thoughts and opinions up to date as I get them. Until next time though, thanks for watching.